All right. Welcome, everybody, to Finance Essentials with Danny Hudson. I am your host, Danny Hudson, and I've got a great show for you guys today. No guest this week. It's just me, which I'm sure a lot of you appreciate. I've gotten some really great feedback from you guys as far as the last several shows. In particular, the one that I had with Scott last week when we were talking about crypto trading, cryptocurrency trading, and then obviously the one with Scott Horton, a personal hero of mine. One thing that I did notice though, I didn't do a whole lot of talking in those shows, and so I know how much you guys miss hearing me do all of the talking. And so there's no guest this week. So you just get to listen to me for the next, 30 or so minutes. But I'm really glad that you guys enjoy the shows where I do have some guests on. I try to keep the shows kind of relevant to the topic. One of the things that we really talk about on this show as far as financial freedom goes is kind of being able to understand the economic and the financial conditions that help kind of give you the tools and the education, and me too, because I learn as we go, to be able to make the right decisions, to be able to achieve those financial goals that you've got set for yourself and for your family. And if not, a way of being able to say, hey, you know what, this is important and this is important. Maybe it's time that I start to reflect on where I'm at in regards to my financial security, which, guess what? That's what we're going to keep talking about today. But anyway, so I want to thank you guys for tuning in this week. I always enjoy getting a chance to do these episodes. So thank you guys for tuning in each and every week. Thank you to everybody who has subscribed, liked, shared the show. Obviously, if you get some value out of it, keep it going. I appreciate it. It's really good whenever I hear positive comments from you guys, and when I see people sharing it, and people that haven't heard before listening to the show. And I've even had some folks that are like, hey, you know what, I never really considered this, or I never really thought about that. And so it's nice to know that we're really making an impact. And obviously follow us on social media. All of those platforms are I don't like them, which I don't think I've made that much of a surprise. That probably doesn't come as a shock. But hey, they are important as far as being able to get the message out. Let's see. So things going on in the news these days. I think Biden and the other self-proclaimed heroes of the globe and the G7 summit have basically finished up their back-patting conference where they all get together and they all tell each other about how great they are and how much good they're doing and how hard they're working to look out for the people on the earth, and and all that nonsense, while the media kind of tells them how great they are. And no one really challenges them and talks about how come we've got a humanitarian crisis in Yemen, and how come lockdowns are going to cost hundreds of thousands of people their lives. And no one ever really pushes them on that. But anyway, they got done with that conference. Some other stuff that's going on, I read that, and I don't know how much truth there is into this, but I read that the Democrats are looking forward to pushing like a $6 trillion infrastructure bill, regardless of whether or not any of the Republicans support it. And Biden is also looking at like a $6 trillion 2022 budget. And so at this point, why even bother using real numbers? Let's just start making up stuff, because at this point, we're at like almost 30 trillion in national debt. Who cares at this point? Let's just, who needs a $6 trillion budget? Let's do a $1 zillion budget, and when people are like, well, how much is that? You go, who knows? Just spend some money. Just that's what we're going to do. We're just going to spend it. But so today's episode, what I wanted to do is I wanted to spend a little bit of time Our source material for today's show comes from Brad Palumbo, who I've been following him now for I guess about a year, and he works for FEE, which is the Foundation of Economic Education, and he's doing great work. I mean, he does really, really great stuff. I follow him on Twitter. I read all of his articles. Him and a handful of folks over at FEE. Hannah Cox is another one. I mean, they just put out great stuff. And so I really appreciate it because it really gives me a good starting point of being able to basically say, hey, look, when we're dealing with X, this is how it relates to us on a personal level, and this is how you should think about it. Now, obviously, as we've talked about in prior shows, my whole goal here is to kind of persuade you, or at least open your mind to thinking about things the way that I do. And so Brad is obviously a great at giving me material to be able to do that. And so this week's episode, I've got 2 articles from Brad that he put out this week. Again, great stuff. I can't recommend following him enough. But the first one is, it was an article that was titled, "New Harvard Data Accidentally Reveals How Lockdowns Have Crushed the Working Class While Leaving the Elites Unscathed." Now, if you have been listening to this show much at all, right from the beginning, we have talked about lockdowns and how they impact, for the most part, the working class, right? Because when it comes down to lockdowns, you have essentially 2 classes, and this goes back to when you hear people talking about a K-shaped economic recovery, right? When it comes to lockdowns, you have 2 classes. You have one group of people who have the opportunity to work from home, to work out of their office, at their house, limit the amount of contact that they have with people. Their employer, their job is not really impacted at all by these government imposed lockdowns. And so for the most part, at least what I have found and what I have seen is that this tends to be the group of people who are most likely to support those types of measures, right? Because some of them, or a lot of them, like me, have basically been working from home since March of last year, and you don't have to wake up to get dressed for work. You don't have to commute into your job. There are selfish reasons of why people want to continue to perpetuate this system. And then the flip side of it are people who don't necessarily have that luxury. Generally, they tend to be, I don't want to call them unskilled, but that's kind of how their job title would be classified as, right? Your cashiers at the grocery store, your stockers at your retail outlets, your delivery drivers, the people who are unable to do their job from home. Now, generally, they're also going to be hourly employees, that they are also going to be ones who don't have the option to work from home because their job entails interacting with people on a regular basis. So those tend to be the 2 groups of people. Unfortunately, the first group tends to be the one who kind of, I don't want to say forces policy on the second group, but that's essentially what happens, right? The first group of people who are kind of the ones that are working from home have enjoyed all of the benefits while their jobs have not been impacted, whereas the second group of people are the ones who have to wear masks all day long. They're the ones who, if you go to your grocery store, at least where we live here in Tennessee, unfortunately, you can tell based off of company policy at the grocery stores who has decided not to get vaccinated because they are forced to continue to wear their masks, which if you've worn a mask, they suck. They're uncomfortable. You sneeze on them. They get dirty. They get germ. I mean, they're awful. But those are the people who, unfortunately, are still continue to be forced into that type. The other flip side of it are people who work in the restaurant business, right? You're a server or a bartender and your business has been shut down. Or you're a business owner that you own a business. Unfortunately, all of your people no longer have jobs, or they have moved on, or whatever it might be, or you've lost your business completely, all at the behest of, I wouldn't say the elite class, but the Zoomers, right? The group of people who are afraid to leave their home. Meanwhile, all of these other people suffer. And so Harvard had put together a study basically analyzing these groups and tracked their employment from pre-lockdowns and where we are currently at the end of March. Now, they will say, well, it's due to the pandemic, right? Which, if you've been listening to the show, we generally tend to refer to it as the lockdowns here because the pandemic was approached by many different places in many different states differently. And at the end of the day, most people had the same results, right? And so I don't want to give undue credit to a pandemic when in reality, most of the economic and financial impacts to people and their lives was actually created by government-imposed lockdowns. And so what Brad surmises in his article, he says, a new data analysis from Harvard University, Brown University, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation calculates how different employment levels have been impacted during the pandemic to date. The findings reveal that government lockdowns devastated workers at the bottom of the financial food chain, but left the upper tier actually better off. So they compared the employment levels, like I mentioned, from January 2020 to March 2021. And what they found was that the employment for, I'm going to flip this. The employment for the high wage, and how they define high wage as people that are making $60,000 and above, is actually up about 2.5%. It's like 2.4%. The middle wage, so between $27,000 and $60,000, actually dropped about 4.5%. And then the employment for the low wage workers, which is those who may make less than $27,000, has dropped 23.6%. 23.6%. That's almost a quarter of people who were low income workers who had a job, and the employment level pre-lockdowns to where they are at the end of March has almost one quarter have lost their jobs. Now, there are several factors that go into that. For example, I have a friend and several friends that all kind of work in the same industry for the same company, or they did. And they work in hospitality, the tourism industry. So think travel, vacationing, and this is in Florida. And this company has similar offices in several other states across the U.S. And what happened is obviously when the lockdowns happened, travel was restricted, and so a lot of them were furloughed. Now, they did keep some people on, right, to kind of maintain operations, but the majority of people were furloughed. Well, near the end of last year, they let everybody go. They let everybody go. And it wasn't that they decided to let all of those people go for performance reasons or anything along those lines. They let these people go because they just shut the whole division. I mean, they shut down the whole business unit. And so anybody all the way from up to the leadership of that, all the way down to the frontline people, they're gone. They lost all of their jobs. And so these are a lot of the frontline people. So think between 500 and 1,000 people no longer have a job to go back to. And the majority of them are the people who are those customer-facing, customer-interacting people who are going to be in that $27,000 to $35,000, a year salary range. And so those are the kinds of people who are going to come to find out that these jobs just don't exist anymore. A lot of these jobs, think hospitality, think food service, those jobs are just not going to be there when these guys decide to come back. Now, Brad also does another article, which we'll get to in a minute, that ties into a portion of it. But one of the other things too is that if you look at the specific states and their approaches to the lockdowns, that the lockdown states, like if you think about like a California versus a Florida, which typically tend to be, I guess, about as comparative as you can get based off of population and that kind of thing. But the California unemployment rate is like 8.5%, 9%. I might be a little bit, that might be a bit of an old number, but it's in the 8 to 9% range. Whereas if you look at Florida, you're talking about 4.5%. And Florida does tend to be a little bit more heavy tourist, heavy hospitality centric. But 24% of these folks who are making $27,000 a year or less are now unemployed versus where they were pre-pandemic. Now, the follow-up article from Brad does, in my opinion, explain some of that, right? If you have been following along with this show, we have talked about many different facets to your life, to your job, to your employment, to your financial security. Things like automation, right? What people and what jobs and what areas are going to replace you by robots. Another one that we've also talked about is education, right? People who are looking at going to school for a 4-year degree versus a trade school. The employment demands, the market demands for people who are working, trade jobs. We've talked a ton about retail, right? Large big box stores no longer employing people, and that environment shifting towards a more nimble, more multitasking capable employees to be able to provide additional value that is going to allow the business to be able to employ some of these more lower paid salaries. The biggest example I brought up was, I can't remember the name of the athletic wear, athleisure, whatever you want to call it, company who's actually expanding their operations, and part of it is because the people that work at the store are no longer just selling or customer service associates. They're actually teaching fitness classes in the store, which is awesome. I mean, I think that's a great concept. I mean, personally, I think that's super smart because you kind of are able to build a community, right? Which we talk about community a lot. But you are also having people who are selling. You have people that are doing customer service, but then you also have people that are providing a value to your customer base. And so that's a company that's kind of expanding, whereas a lot of these other ones are shedding employment, and a lot of them will fall under that that low range, that low wage category. Another one obviously is food service. We talked about hospitality, but food service, the companies that are really expanding their footprint aren't full service restaurants. They're fast casual, like we've talked about. They're ghost kitchens where they basically cook all the food, but all of the food service itself is actually just delivery. They don't really have you can come in and sit down and eat at this place, because labor costs in that regard is off the charts, and you have to be able to keep those costs low if you want to be able to keep your business going. Which leads me to kind of an underlying theme here that we've talked about on the show, which is when we're talking about this kind of stuff, you have to keep in the back of your mind that we as a community, it's our responsibility to help take care of a lot of these people, in as so much as the capacity that you have, right? It's not always the best option, and the government gets this wrong, obviously, is to just give people money, which we're gonna talk about here in a second. It's not always the best idea to just give people money, right? I don't think the majority of us would really feel very fulfilled. I mean, maybe some of us will, of just getting money, right? We want to be able to have a sense of accomplishment. We want to be able to have a sense of fulfillment, that we're serving a purpose rather than just getting a check. And so the next piece that Brad talks about is it was talking about the enhanced unemployment benefits, which we have also talked about some on this show. We even talked about it in the last solo episode where we talked about scarcity, price scarcity. We talked about unemployment enhancement benefits. We talked about the jobs numbers, and what was driving that. But what Brad does is he made another article this week, and it was called "Unemployment Households Can Earn $25 an Hour on Welfare in 21 States." New study finds. And so what he talks about is the number of unfilled jobs, which is about 9.3 million across the U.S., all while you have millions of people who are basically staying on these enhanced unemployment benefits. And so in March 2020, if you recall, there was a temporary, well, quote unquote temporary, right? Because some people are using this as an introduction to UBI, which is universal basic income. But they started in March 2020 an enhanced unemployment of about $600 per week. And then Biden adjusted it to about $300 per week. But what you're finding is that obviously a lot of people are not entering back into the workforce. Now, as we have also discussed on this show, and as we kind of alluded to here a few minutes ago, is that I don't believe that the majority of people specifically look to take advantage of a system. Now, there obviously are people that do, but I do believe that there are people who do want to have that sense of fulfillment. But especially in a scenario like these enhanced benefits, right? They are currently set to expire in September. Okay, well, if I work a really crappy job that I don't like, and I don't like my boss, and I don't like doing this, and this is the area that I work in, and I know they're going to end in September, why bother going out and getting a job right now if I'm going to get a job that makes less than what I'm currently getting paid? And so I can see that this is supposed to end in September, so I'm just going to wait it out. And so what you're finding is a lot of states, not a lot of states, but a lot of conservative states that have Republican governors have basically suspended the additional benefits. Now, if you happen to be on Twitter, you will see a lot of people that are making the claim, well, they're really screwing over low-skilled people by eliminating these benefits. And the other group of people are basically saying, well, if these employers paid people more money, then people wouldn't be willing to sit at home and do nothing while they get a check. But if you're looking at this and you're thinking about it, if they're earning $25 an hour, nowhere in the country are people, especially kind of around that level, getting paid $25 an hour. It's just not going to happen. It's not happening, right? Like, that doesn't really exist. But because of these additional enhanced unemployment benefits and that kind of thing, it's really driving that home. And another issue that I also tend to take, which I've talked about on this show before, is that all of these people that are saying, well, if employers paid people more money, a quote unquote living wage, which we also did, an episode on living wage and what a dumb term that it is. Labor cost is one of the number one drivers of costs for a business. And so if you think that a business owner can just go ahead and just start paying all of these people $25 an hour, and you're not going to see either the business go under, or you're not going to see a significant, well, maybe not necessarily significant, it depends on what their margins are and how much the owner is willing to eat, but you will see price increases. A lot of that cost is going to get pushed off onto the customer. Another thing too is you'll see, like, when Target bumped up their starting wages to $15 an hour, a lot of people were like, yes, I work for Target and I'm so glad that I'm going to be making more money. And then they realized that their hours got cut from 30 hours a week down to 20 hours a week, and they actually make less money than they did before. Now, maybe they're happy about, well, they're not happy. They're not happy about that. But some people might be like, all right, well, I make $50 less a check, but I work 10 hours less. So maybe that's not necessarily a bad trade-off. But there's always going to be trade-offs, right? Because the company is still going to be focused on that bottom line and making sure that they hit profitability targets. So a lot of these Republican governors and conservative states has actually suspended that additional benefit because, again, like we've talked about on prior shows, that the current unemployment rate in the U.S. is equivalent to what it was in like 2015, 2016, right around in that neighborhood, right? And back then, no one was talking about enhanced unemployment. No one was talking about bailouts or anything like that. It was just a normal business cycle. So what Brad does is he goes on to explain a little bit more into the what he refers to as blue states, right? So think about your Democrat governors and that kind of thing. And so he goes into to 25 of those states. He says across all 25 blue states choosing to leave the benefits in place, the average unemployment payout for a family of four exceeds $72,000, significantly more than the median household income of $68,700. So what this is basically saying is that if you have a family of four, so two kids and two working adults, two working parents, that are now collecting these unemployment benefits, is that they now make more money than the average median household income in the US, right? And so if you think about it, it's an unsustainable system. But what you will do is you're going to create a class or a caste of people who become dependent, who become reliant on that type of living, right? It's similar to think about it whenever you hear a high profile nasty celebrity divorce, right? Where someone goes in and the one of them makes all of the money, right, and the other one doesn't work, but the person who isn't working gets an astronomical settlement for whatever the judge decides. A lot of it is based off of, well, this person is deserving of a lifestyle that they are accustomed to. And so when you think about it like that, right, this family of four who has now been, for the greater part of a year and a half going on 2 years, become accustomed to this $72,000 a year. Whereas before, maybe combined, they were making 50 or maybe even 60 or even 65. It doesn't matter what the specific number is, but the fact is that now, by not participating in the workforce, they're actually making more than they were before. And so these people are going to become dependent or reliant on a system that is continuing to give them this money, or they are going to suffer setbacks. Maybe they won't be able to afford a car payment. Maybe they won't be able to afford rent. Whatever might be going on in their lives. And so what they're going to find is that they're going to find that either they're going to have to continue this type of funding of the system, or these people are going to kind of have a fall back to reality. And so I think what you're going to find is you are going to find that there's going to be a big push, for things like UBI to help keep these people that are in this situation stable. Again, as we've discussed in prior shows, is that there are millions of people who are behind on their rent and their mortgage payments and that kind of thing. And so you have a large group of people at this point who have a financial burden, and they are doing nothing to alleviate that burden, right? They're not doing anything to help take care of that burden, because they are falling into this category where they're doing better by doing nothing than they are by contributing value. And so the point that I really want to drive home to you guys is that is no way to be. It is an unsustainable system. And so your priority and my priority, and what you should really be thinking about and really driving home for you and your family, is that your number one priority, your number one goal, my number one priority, is to not be poor. Your goal should not be poor. You do not want to have to be dependent or reliant on a system to help you be able to keep your lights on. Now, we talked about that in the last solo episode. We were talking about price gouging, that you should never put yourself in a position where you are having to decide between a gallon of gas or a case of water. You should never be in that situation. Now, there are going to be people that are going to say, well, that's the government's responsibility. It is not the government's responsibility. It is your responsibility. Your number one goal, again, should be to not be poor. Now, when I say not be poor, that means several things, right? I'm not necessarily meaning it from a financial standpoint. There are a lot of people that have beautiful skills, right? They can do amazing things with their hands. They can build incredible things. And guess what? They don't make a lot of money doing it. But that's okay, right? Because they have the ability to be able to provide for themselves and their families. Maybe you're an agorist, right? If you're not very familiar with agorism and agorists, they typically tend to be in a system that they at least to shoot for anyway, to exist outside of a typical system. So think about they do things to try to help being able to avoid taxes, and they tend to be more self-sustaining. They make and build communities where they support each other rather than kind of participating in the forced system. And so there are people like that would be classified as poor, but they're not poor. They're much better off than the majority of us. They're better off than me. I can tell you that. I mean, if the power grid was to go out tomorrow, I mean, it was nice knowing you guys. I mean, we'll probably last a little while, but it ain't gonna be that long. So poor is relative. Poor, in the sense that I am defining it, is reliance and dependence upon somebody else for you to be able to meet your sustenance. Because again, a lot of these people who are in this boat, right, where they're getting $72,000 a year, if that well dries up, they're in real serious trouble. And so I'm going to drive it home. I'm going to say it one more time. Your number one priority, if you're watching, I'm holding up one finger. Well, I guess if you're listening, I'm holding up one finger. If you're watching, you can see it. But your number one priority in your life, in your goal, should not be poor. And so if you're thinking about it and you're like, hey, you know what? I'm not in that situation. I'm one of those 24% of people, who had a job prior to lockdowns, but I don't currently have one. Because the truth is, a lot of those jobs aren't coming back. Right? A lot of them are going to be automated away. States like Florida, who passed a $15 minimum wage, I don't know exactly what the phasing is going to be, but it's going to phase in. But there are going to be a lot of businesses that are going to pivot their roles and their jobs to either having less staff. They're going to pivot the types of services and types of products that they offer to help keep costs to a minimum. And so if you're listening to this right now and you're thinking, well, what am I going to do? If you're not providing at least $15 worth of value, then you might not have a job to go back to. Now, one of the benefits and one of the perks of this is that if you do happen to be one of these people that is falling into this category, you have time. Right? You have time to improve your skills. You have time to put some money off to the side to start your own business. You have time and the funds to be able to do that type of thing, which I absolutely encourage, right? You're never going to be able to achieve financial freedom and financial security by relying on the government to be able to pay your bills. It's just not going to happen. So I hope that drives a big point home. I really hope that if you're listening to this show, you're probably, well, if this is your first time, that might come as a surprise. But if it's not your first time, it's not really a new message, and it's something that you should have been considering and thinking about before. But I really hope that if you guys do happen to know somebody who falls into this category, you have that talk. Share the show with them, whatever it might be, but put people in the position to where they can make their lives better, and they're not going to be reliant or dependent upon the government to be able to meet those needs. So I hope you got some good things out of the show. I know reading through Brad's stuff, I really enjoyed it a lot. It really kind of helped add some additional perspective for me. But again, if you get some value out of it, share the show, go on to the podcast platforms. Feel free to leave a rating, leave a review, subscribe on whatever platform you also listen or watch on. And we will talk to you again next week. Oh, actually, we probably won't talk to you next week because we are going to be be on vacation. But we will be back the week after that, and maybe I'll have a federal budget that I can dissect for you guys. Nothing like dissecting $6 trillion, right? But all right, well, we will talk to you guys again soon. All right, bye.